So with that being said, there are some things that I agree with in these manuscripts. Actually, most of it I agree with, but there are a few things that I don't agree with. We found a lot of that with the Magdalene manuscript. For example, we know that Yeshua was never crucified. And then in the Magdalene manuscript, there is sections about the crucifixion, but of course, at that point, Tom Kenyon, when he was channeling this information, the whole world believed that Yeshua was crucified. There was no information to counter that claim. Only recently has stuff come out or been disclosed to prove the truth that he was never crucified. And so we have to understand that there is a perceived sense of reality. Same with geography with a lot of these channelings. We've run into that with the idea of where Egypt is. And 5 years ago, less than 5 years ago, maybe even like 2 years ago, I would have believed that Egypt was the place that in Africa that we've been taught it is. But now so much has come out, so much information has come out with the Tartarian stuff to prove that where we call Egypt isn't actually Egypt. Egypt is actually the actual Egypt spoken about in the Emerald Tablets, in all the missing books of the Bible, is actually the southeastern part of the United States. How do we find the information that Yeshua was never crucified? Missing books of the Bible. That's the main source of information, is the missing books of the Bible. That is why they banned most. So there's supposed to be 777 books in the collective Bible. We only have 66 of those books, and those 66 books were fabricated by King James. So we don't even really have access to the full transcripts of the teachings of Yeshua and Magdalene, because Magdalene was his co-teacher. She was also the Christ. She was the Vesica Pisces, which people use as the fish emblem today. It's actually the Vesica Pisces, which was the original emblem of Christianity. It was not the cross. It was the Vesica Pisces, because Magdalene herself was the main teacher. Yeshua was her husband, her Messiah. Messiah means phallical pillar. So no, Yeshua is not your Messiah. He is Magdalene's Messiah. Phallical pillar means a penis. He was her husband. All right. So we have to start to really untangle this web. I get people asking me all the time, like, how do I talk to my friends and family about the Bible being fabricated, or Christianity not being what we think it is? And I always say, don't start with the big stuff. Don't start with the whole Jesus means hail Satan and the real name was Yeshua and he was never crucified. Don't start with that. Right? They're going to push back. They've been so heavily brainwashed into this destructive death cult, which Christianity is, a destructive death cult. Start with maybe asking them, like, isn't it interesting that the Bible is the Word of God, but yet there's a copyright on it? Maybe you should look and see who owns the copyright of the Bible. Start there. Because that's when it's going to start. You're obviously going to have people have cognitive dissonance with some of this stuff for a while. That's okay. We all go through that. But just start planting those seeds with the little things. Why does the Windsor family have a copyright on the Bible? And why do all these other religious texts, like the Vedic text, Bhagavad Gita, that we're taught as satanic, those don't have copyrights on them? But yet the Bible does. Interesting. Kind of interesting, right? Or have you noticed that a lot of these characters in the Bible are doing human sacrifice? Have you noticed that? Like, that's kind of weird, right? Like, or that they have like a ton of wives. It's not like these wives wanted to be their wives. This is, this is trafficking. But yet these are men of God? Interesting. Kind of weird. Like, shit's not adding up, right? And then you can start to say things like, hey, in some of these missing books of the Old Testament, it says very clearly, that Yahweh is Moloch. And Moloch is the god of child sacrifice. It's a little strange, no? We maybe start or in the missing books of the Old Testament, Jehovah is also a name for a demon, one of the high-ranking demons under Lucifer. So maybe just kind of start pointing that stuff out. And then over time, when it starts to unravel, then people will be ready for like the big thing, like the big things. Like, yeah, his name wasn't Jesus. Jesus means hell Satan. The J sound didn't exist back then. His name was actually Yeshua ben Yosef. He was not Jewish, he was Egyptian, as was his wife Magdalene. They were the Essenes, which is the priesthood of Isis. Isis was spelled ESSE back then, the Essenes, and he was never crucified. And how amazing is that? That's actually really good news. Like, that's the good news, is that he was not crucified, because the God that I believe in, the God that I pray to, the God that I feel a connection to, would never ask for a human sacrifice, right? In fact, the God that I believe in would never want people doing that to each other or to the animals. And so, isn't it interesting that these satanic practices involve these rituals, but yet those rituals are being done in the New Testament and being reenacted in churches every Sunday, and communion ain't nothing but cannibalism. Then you can start coming in with the heavy stuff, but it's going to take a time. I would also suggest, we talk a lot about cults on this channel. I would absolutely suggest, if you are really concerned about some of your family members that are heavily indoctrinated into the Christian faith, regardless of whether that's Protestant or Catholicism, doesn't matter. It's all coming from the same source. I would heavily suggest studying cults and deprogramming. The one thing you're going to find, like, I can talk openly with you guys because you guys are ready to hear it. But the one thing you're going to find when you're coming up against somebody who has heavily been indoctrinated into a cult, whether that's Scientology, whether that's Nexium, whether that's Heaven's Gate, Branch Davidians, or the Christian church, doesn't matter, is that if you start to come in heavy and hard with bashing the belief system, they're going to double down. And understand that these people, we've all been there. We've all been brainwashed in some way or another, whether that's through religion, whether that's through academia, whether that's through science or medicine. It doesn't matter. There are cults everywhere. It becomes this belief system that is indoctrinated into you becomes a part of your visceral reality. And so when you come in strong and you try to rip that from somebody, their whole world starts to crumble, and they're going to hold on to that belief system even stronger because it's a survival tactic. And so you need to come at them with humanity, with love, with compassion, with understanding, and slowly let them start to ask you questions. Just saying like, oh, did you know the Bible has a copyright? Like, that's harmless. That's a harmless thing to say to somebody. It's not harmless in the fact that it's them telling you, it's the controllers telling you that the Bible isn't the word of God. They have to tell you the truth. And that's how they tell you the truth, is showing you that there's a copyright on the Bible, which means it was invented by someone. But as far as like the belief system, when you point out there's a copyright on the Bible, you're not actually challenging the belief system at that moment. And so you can start with that. You can start with that. And then let them ponder that for a while. Plant the seeds. Let them start to ponder that. Plant it in their head, back of their head, so it's kind of there. Then maybe you can start to talk about Mithraism. Like, isn't it fascinating that the Jesus story is identical to the Mithra story? Isn't that fascinating? Let that start to untangle. Then when they come to you, and 9 times out of 10, once that stuff starts to untangle in somebody's mind, they will start doing the research on their own without even asking you. They might not even come to you until after they've started doing their own research. They might just sit at their house one day thinking, God, this is kind of weird, and then just start Googling shit.